Call to order at 2:35 for our October Committee of the Whole meeting. First item on the agenda is the adoption of the agenda. So any comments, questions, requests for additions?
Yeah, I have a request.
Fire away.
I'd like to add Gary Neeson's list of points. I actually thought that was going to be what we would be discussing today, because I think it addresses many of the questions around the conversion report. So I would like Gary's questions to be reviewed by us.
Any other thoughts on that?
I think that's a great idea. I thought so too, and I didn't see it on the agenda, and I didn't know whether I had mistakenly thought that or what, but I think it's something we should talk about.
Okay. John?
I'm sorry, I'm going to go one step further. I thought we were talking about the conversion report today, which would include Gary Mason's comments.
Yeah, I'll second that one too.
Yeah, I
Well,
did.
this is kind of talking about the conversion report, yeah.
Okay. That's a bigger topic for sure, right?
Absolutely.
I don't know how I'm trying to recall our last meeting. Ted, what are your thoughts on this?
That was my understanding.
Well,
Hey,
it's
Robbie.
I think
Hey,
it's
Rob,
in the other
we're
part.
they're just in the middle of,
That's all right.
it's on the agenda. Okay, so we just couple minutes.
Can we shut that down?
Okay.
Okay, is we shut that down so we don't get more of that? Go on do not disturb or something? Excellent, thank you. Trustee Harrelson.
Could I ask Mr. Chair Suzanne to just add on to what she's stating regarding your decent points she's talking about?
I circulated an email from Gary when did I send? He sent it on September 18th, so I think it was probably that day or the day after I sent it on to each of you to say, here's his input on the governance study draft report. And the question I asked of you is saying, I think we should forward this to the working committee, any objections? And I didn't get any responses from anybody but Gary, who said, yes, that's a good idea.
I have no problem with that at all.
Yeah. So, I'd like to speak, I'd like to take a turn here too, thank you. I would suggest that we do have a very, fairly full agenda as it is, where we have a few things to get through. This particular idea of reviewing the governance report, I'd like to understand a little further, A, what's the objective of doing that? And B, how much time do we need to allot for it? If we back up one from that and say, review Gary's points, what would we like to get out of that? Like, I'd like to understand what the objective is.
Yes.
Yes.
First of all, I want to confirm that it was, Gary even references it, that when you are going to be talking about conversion study, which was brought up by Trustee France, you might want to consider these questions. Well, the very first one on the list is something that I think is not a decision to be made by the working committee, by which I think you mean the committee that talks to urban systems. It's an idea that we as a board need to discuss. Gary's comments were a reflection of the concerns that were raised at our last board meeting. We've hired him as a parliamentarian. Each of his concerns are valid, and they're not in the purview of urban systems. They're in our purview to discuss and be clear on. So I very strongly want to go through this list and ensure that we as trustees, as a board, we're all on the same page with the points that are raised, and then we can move forward. When we do that, it may well be that some of the concerns, which I'm not sure what they are, that one of our trustees raised, is answered. And if not, that can go to urban systems, but something is missed here, and I did not get an email saying, are you okay with forwarding these to, I did not get that email, Ian.
And it may be my bad, but I looked in my email this morning and saw it. It's just whether.
I did not get that this was what we were going to do, was just send Gary's questions to urban systems. That's not my understanding at all. I think there's very valuable points that he's raised that are part of our due diligence. So I would like at least Gary's questions to be on today's agenda.
So, John?
A couple comments. I thought it was a motion, I could be wrong. There was no motion on the set minutes in the last meeting that said, do X, and that would include bringing the conversion report forward to this meeting. That would have been an obvious thing when we talked about it. I'm sorry, I just don't know. I went looking for it on the computer, getting a weird message. The second thing I got is,
Do you know if that's in the hour line, that we would carry that forward? So carry on.
So the second comment I got is I agree with everything Trustee Susanna said, and I thought we had that conversation to bring it forward. But it stems, I know I raised some concerns about certain things within the report, and the major one was the numbers. There's lots of hints about what's going to happen, but in my mind, it would be fairly, I think it'd be fairly straightforward to take those.
Let's not go into the details of it. That's an example.
Okay, that's fine. That's the issue I've got. And I guess the third part I want to ask is, this is now out to the public, right? Mm-hmm. It's not going to be changed.
That I don't believe is true. The draft is the draft. The purpose of it being out to the public and there being open houses and public consultation is to gather further information and finalize the report.
Okay. And of course, it's up to the committee whether or not they want to change it, but I think it's really important for us to register whatever concerns we have and that they're part of the written record.
Okay?
To answer what I think I heard you say, it's hard for me to hear in this echo chamber, but anyway, what the goal I see of discussing this for me personally is to get clarity on these issues, which I think are all very important. Because if I am to speak at all to the public about why I think a certain way, I need these questions answered too, and also to answer their questions, as well as a couple of questions specifically about this Devonshire debt and this, I don't understand anything going on there. And to the point you were talking about this draft report, when you look at these newsletters that were issued, was the last one in September, it says the final report will be issued after the public open house and community engagement. So I'm assuming that we're going to get a final report after all of that? Because after all of that, we're supposed to have a referendum. So there's lots of things as a board member that I think I feel fairly responsible for, and I'm totally ill-equipped right now.
So I think that there's a separate issue going on there, which is new board members versus ones that have kind of come through the process to a certain extent, right?
Maybe, but Suzanne's not new, and she still has questions. She thinks these are points that she doesn't completely have answers to, so I don't know if that's completely... Yeah, I agree.
No,
I am a new board member, and I don't understand some of the things like the debt and all that.
So here's my concern, right, is that obviously we're not even in agreement whether we should discuss this. I actually believe that the working committee was established for this reason, and that the working committee gathers information and processes it on behalf of all of the community, or of all of the, constituents, which is CBRD, ourselves, or the systems. And that there is opportunity, as in Gary presenting his requirements or his input here, for that to be absorbed into that report and for new trustees to be able to read and ask questions and comment back to that report as well, right? So I do worry about us creating new processes that are in conflict with the processes that have already been established, right? Hence my input. John was next year.
Okay, to be honest, I'm not worried about that. What I am worried about is that all of us give a chance to have a fulsome discussion, and whether or not you're old or new, hey, you know what, old guys can learn new tricks too. And so I propose the following resolution, that the Gary Nason's letter and the conversion report be added to the end of the agenda for discussion.
And I have a question.
Sorry, there's a motion on the floor, so we need a second.
I'll second that.
So now we can discuss it, sorry.
Sorry, okay, if we were to do, if that was to happen, where you said this should really just go to the working committee, that's what it's for, and they somehow weed the answers into this report, so that means we're gonna have another final draft. When will that report come out with this in it?
A great question for the working committee, but if I were to interpret what I believe is going to happen is that any further input is going to be gathered from interested parties, which could include us as trustees, or it could include Gary, or it could include the public. Any report will be finalized. There will be one more report. There won't be another draft and then a report. There'll be one more report. That's my understanding.
And the timing of that?
Would be after the open houses and before.
Okay. I have trouble with that timing, because these questions are very good questions.
So the process of gathering input can go on forever. And that was really how the thing was designed, right? So I would suggest the motion's on the floor and we're debating it here. What I guess is, I sense that I'm opposing it and that maybe I'm the only one, and that we're maybe using our time where we could be applying it towards that. So I'm going to suggest a vote on this topic to say whether we're going to add it to the agenda as opposed to debating it now. All right, so can I suggest that we try to move towards a vote unless somebody else has a comment? This is just about adding it to the agenda.
Okay, well, Craig, I propose a motion. Do I get to speak to it?
You can, but again, why don't we vote on it and see if it gets you your motion, right? Unless you believe that there's something that we haven't said yet. I'm just worried about us spending our entire time debating whether we should add something to the agenda.
I was going to come up with a short.
Okay.
My concerns with the conversion report are such that as a resident, I will vote no for conversion as it currently stands if the report is inconclusive. That's how important this conversation is to me.
Okay.
That's it.
So, shall we vote? Are we adding this? All in favor of the resolution to add this to the agenda? Opposed? Okay, so that's added to the agenda. I have another item that I would like to add to the agenda. And that is, in a similar vein, we are moving towards probably one of the most significant events ever in UBID's history as this referendum. And we as a board need to discuss how we speak collectively and how we speak individually. If we read the conflict of interest in the trustees handbook, there is guidance towards us about speaking with one voice. And it's not prescriptive or detailed, but it guides us in that direction. And yet, I find myself troubled by saying we can't have an opinion individually. And I would like us to discuss, how does that work? How do we express both a collective board opinion while being able to express our own opinions? And do it in a way, like in a public discussion here, that we decide and show that. So that's, my motion is we add that to the agenda. Is there a second? Okay.
All in favor?
Is there any additional discussion, or should we just vote on that?
Could you repeat the motion, please?
To discuss how we will speak both collectively and individually about things related to the governance study and the referendum. So that's been seconded. All in favor of adding it? Okay. Let's move on to the second item of the agenda, which is the approval of the minutes from the committee of the whole meeting in August. Motion to approve the minutes.
I shall move.
Second. Any seconds?
Well, I wasn't there, so okay.
I'll second it. I'll second it. Any comment, questions, changes? Okay, all in favor? Sorry. Okay, go ahead.
Can I just ask, I don't know if it's a point of order on this, but the in-camera minutes are included with the regular minutes. Is that normal?
The motion from the in-camera minutes is here. The discussions that went behind that motion had the potential to discuss items of a sensitive nature, yet the motion itself is not sensitive.
Okay.
So we attempt to be as transparent as possible with those things. But, for example, we were talking about a union contract which included wages, so we didn't want to have that in the public, but we wanted the motion to be in the public. Okay?
I understand it. From my experience, it's a little bit unusual. But that's okay. I can live with it.
Our experience in the day is that we have had far too much happen in camera and not be published, that we want to try to do as much as we can in the public view. And yes, so we can correct that part. It's happened in the past. Okay, Janice, I presume that call was
Robert.
Robert.
So Robert is the RBC banking rep, and he's the one you're gonna ask questions to about the financing, and he can talk to you about it, so. Are you there, Robert?
Yes, I am.
Okay, I'm gonna try and turn you up. So it's sort of not ideal because I'm the only one on the computer, but everybody's here. So, I don't know, can you see?
We can see that there's somebody there.
Yeah,
Hello?
that's Robert. So, Robert, the information is, I can,
Not really.
go ahead.
Yeah, I'm here to run for what I hear from RBC Commercial Banking in Victoria.
Well,
Yep.
Good.
Could we move you up?
I'm having a hard time hearing you.
You sound fine.
Nobody's saying anything, that's why. Go ahead.
This is going to be really hard with the camera way over there, and it's not going to be
Is
able
there
to.
some way you could just come up here for now with the computer?
Whose cell phone or phone number and just put me on speakerphone, it might work better that way. And then you can get the phone closer.
Yeah.
Okay, call me on my cell. 250-897-9583.
And it's right here, what do you got out there?
250-897 9583.
Okay, you keep cutting out, you just keep.
It's the Wi-Fi. Okay, it's the Wi-Fi in here, it's crap. Okay,
What's his number? Just call him.
Robert, what's your number? I mean, this is almost better if we were to meet all of us on computer. Would you prefer to do that? Because on cell phones, it's gonna be brutal.
Okay. The report you gave us was very clear. Unless anybody has questions, do we need to talk to them?
I'm sorry, I didn't have the percentages and everything, it's very well documented.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's a question of whether you want to keep it variable or pay an extra percentage point, or you want to go with a 1 or 2 year fixed term, and it really goes down to what you think the risk is. In my mind, if I don't hear anything different, take 2 year. At that time, you're well past the referendum.
That's right, and then you can put it after that.
Exactly, and then you can revisit it. Interest rates, I'm going to say it, aren't going to go up. You know, anything you say.
It's amazing.
Sorry?
1.5%.
It's amazing, right? This is very little risk. So unless there's specific questions, so I'm not trying to cut down the conversation. I'm just saying for me, there was no, and there are questions, great, that's absolutely.
No, my only question was, can RBC offer less than municipal financing? And I know the answer is no, they cannot.
1.5% for 1 year.
Municipal finance rates are about 0.5% below
It's
these.
less than what any bank can offer, period.
My question is, that I might have misunderstood, but in this report, there's something, does it have any impact on conversion either way? How does it have an impact on that?
That was what we wanted to be careful of, is that we didn't lock ourselves into a term that we would be penalized if we converted. So that's the pressing issue.
I think that we would have to go, take the benefit of the doubt, assume that the vote will go in favor of conversion and do what's best for that scenario,
Yeah, I agree with that.
even if it doesn't pass.
Yes.
So Robert has tried to address that in his notes, right? I agree with his conclusions.
It's not good here. So there are some questions for you.
Susanna, do you want to ask you a question?
Hi, Robert.
Yes, you are.
Hi.
Just tell me when that's up.
Okay, so we're ready for our questions.
Question number one, Robert. Can RBC provide an interest rate that is on par with what municipal financing authority offers?
Okay, and to answer your question additionally, no, and I can explain why. So, the Municipal Finance Authority and the World Bank of Canada, and in this case, all other scheduled chartered banks, are quite different from the Municipal Finance Authority in the way we acquire capital and in turn how we price our loans. So, if you look at the Municipal Finance Authority, SBC,
Thank you, so the answer is no. Thank you.
John? If we went with either 1 or 2 year, would it be principal and interest over that period?
Yes, I would recommend making principal and interest payments just because it's going to lower your interest costs instead of just floating in interest over a year or a year and a half until that point, whether you amalgamate or not. So my recommendation is to make the principal and interest payments. It's cheaper for you in the long run. Now, if your preference is to make interest only until you consider whether amalgamation is an option, I can certainly go back and request an interest only period until that time, but that would be subject to approval outside of the original loan approval. The original loan approval was to fund construction on an interest only basis, followed by paying out interest once the project was completed.
Other questions?
Okay, Robert, when it comes to the loan, is the loan at present on the financing still in the form of a builder's loan, or has it been converted?
Yes, it's in the builder's loan, or as we refer to it as a construction loan at this point. So it is interest only. You're only paying interest at this moment, which is Royal Bank Prime plus 0, and Royal Bank Prime is currently 2.45. So when I was speaking to Janice about options, I would certainly, one of them is determining it out and selecting a 1-year term would be A, you're making principal payments, which lowers your total interest cost, but also too, the fixed rates are currently lower than prime right now. So I have some rates in front of me. So the 1-year fixed rate today is 1.45% preferred rate for the district. So that is 1% below prime. So there is a benefit to terming it out, selecting a 1-year fix if you feel it's going to take at least 1 year to complete amalgamation and have the loan taken over by the municipal finance authority.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Suzanne?
You've mentioned it, Robert. We want to be transparent and clear that we are in the process of possibly converting. So we want to make sure that we've not closed off any options for ourselves. And that you understand that as well, yeah.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
And my discussion with Janice is that we can keep the loan arrangement very flexible, but you're not closing off any options with Royal Bank. So we would love to do the takeout amortizing for you, but we understand the benefits to potentially amalgamating with the district. So we can amend the loan in a way that will make it easy for you to make that transition. But let's say for whatever reason the transition doesn't happen, we can still go back to the original terms and term out with Royal Bank of Canada if you wish. So by no means are you closing off any options at this point with us.
Thank you.
Tom, you had a question?
Yeah, if we went with 2 year, I think we're fixed to that 2-year term, we can't pay another rate.
No, you can't. So if you select it, you need to know with 100% certainty that amalgamation and the subsequent payout of the loan is going to take longer than 2 years, right? Because you can't pay out a fixed rate loan because it would then be subject to breakage costs, and that would cost the district a lot of money. So if you are going to select a fixed rate term, try to align it with the completion date for the amalgamation and the subsequent financing from the municipal finance authority.
Okay. Other questions? Thank you, Robert, for making yourself available for us to ask questions of. I think it's up to us now to make a decision.
Okay, great. Well, if you have any other questions, Janice, please feel free to send me an email but I just wanted to say thank you for the opportunity to be part of the district, and wish you all the best of luck in your future decisions.
Thank you.
All
Bye.
right, bye.
So, thoughts? There's no motion that we're voting on here yet, although we may end up taking one, right? So let's start this out as a discussion and sort of lean towards something that we might want to vote on. So, John, if you want to start it off.
Sorry, just as a comment, one thing I didn't hear him say is the reason why the face so low is because it's guaranteed by the province and every municipality in the province. So they have huge reserves, and that's why the rates are so low.
Right.
Okay, so can I not just put forward a resolution?
Why don't we hold off for a sec and just let everybody go around, have a say, and then see if there's something that sort of bundles out of that. But let's just have a discussion first and see what bundles out.
Okay, well, I guess to start out, I'm all for doing things simple. And simple in my mind is you fix it for 2 years, you don't have to go back and look at it, there's no renewal, it's lower staff time because you're not bringing it back in a year's time. Put it away for 1.53%. There's not much difference between 1 and 2 years, and you're done. Move on, deal with other issues.
Other comments?
Well, because I'm new, I don't know, and I haven't been on an advisory committee or committees. What is the timeline for conversion if it was, the vote was to be affirmative? Is there any guess on that?
We don't.
I think Ted's right, is that we don't firmly know, but what we do know is what has been talked about at the working committee.
I talked to Kevin Duville about it.
Okay.
To try and get some tighter timelines. He said if you guys decide to convert, then he said the sooner, you can come in twice a year. At the beginning of the year, so like January 1 or July. So July.
So that would be the most likely time for us to convert is July,
Next year, which is...
within a year.
And this one-year fixed rate, you said, is between 12 and 24 months away, so they guarantee we could do another 1 year at 1.4?
No, I don't think there's a guarantee of that. We're then at risk of what happens with interest rates. I haven't checked.
24 months.
I haven't checked in the last month or the last 3 weeks, but the last time I went and looked at the Bank of Canada's interest rate direction statement, it said they did not expect any increases in interest rates through 2021.
But the other question is we did either 1 or 2, they're both fixed, so if they did want to take over in July, then we would pay a penalty unless they carried that loan until they could.
Right, they would carry it.
Okay.
This is not super accurate math, right? But if you take 0.13%, which is the difference between 1 year and 2 year, and apply that to $3.5 million, it's $45,000 a year. Right, so it's not an insignificant amount that we're thinking about here, right? And I'll do the math again just to make sure you didn't slip it at that point. And so I think the math that has to be done is if you save that $45,000, how many months past July, if you had to go on to a variable rate, like the prime rate of 2.45, would it take to eat up the $45,000, right? So what's the full period of benefit that you get by taking the lower rate? And we could try to do that math with a quick spreadsheet just to say what that is. My personal leaning is towards the 1 year rate because of that factor that there's money on the table. Suzanne?
I also feel the same way. It's October, so we would sign it October, it would come due October. That's well within July conversion, as per Kevin Duville's estimate. And it doesn't prevent us from, if it fails, from, turning it into a bigger loan, or, amortized over a long period.
0.1% of 3.5 million is about $3,500. 1% of 3.5 million is $35,000.
35,000, did slip a digit.
No, it's $3,500.
It's $4,500 is what the difference is. Sorry, I did slip a digit. So there's a risk factor that's associated with saving $4,500. So if it's, I might move more towards John's position than if it's only $4,500.
Well, yeah, on the other chance that we vote against conversion, then it's actually better if we take a short term. Because then we can go to long term sooner, which is even better, or what?
I think longer term rates right now are going to be higher.
Higher.
Yeah, they are.
But still not bad. You got a pretty good rate.
The other thing is, I think the budget for interest was done at 3.5%, is that correct, Janice?
I don't know what it did.
We should check out on the water treatment plant on what was budgeted for and what we created our budget on, but my understanding is it was at a substantially higher interest rate on a 25-year amortization. And so the other question that we have here is it make sense to do this at a 25-year term, or because of low interest rates, do we try to knock it off faster with a 20-year amortization? John?
Another kind of a weird question is, our debt of the improvement district secured by the assets of the improvement district?
I thought it was unsecured, or maybe not.
I don't want to answer the question.
Because
Janice, is this security against the water cap?
I don't know the answer to that.
I think it would be, right now, the construction loan it probably isn't, but when it goes into a full on.
well, sorry, we have to be very careful about that. I know it's a little bit of a technical question, but to me, if you've got security, you should be able to get a better rate, and I just don't know the answer to that. I don't know if the improvement district is allowed.
So Janice, would you ask that question, Robert? What security is involved in this flow?
And whether or not it makes a difference?
Because our assets are around 9 million. Our assets, I think, are around 9 million.
Depreciated assets?
Well, there's a difference between the sinking funds, the reserve funds, and active assets as well.
Yeah.
So we're not making a motion on this right
The
now.
debt is unsecured, it says right here. Construction loan with RBC, the amount of 3.5 million for water treatment plant. The debt is unsecured and bears interest at bank funding. Is that not the answer to the question?
It says that word in the conversion.
You asked if it was secured or unsecured, it says it's unsecured.
If I make it slightly different, that one is, but I'm curious about if we go to a 1 or 2%, whether it's secured against assets. And even whether we can do that, I just don't know.
What is the interest rate we're paying on this construction loan?
2.45.
So we could just keep that until we vote, correct?
We could.
Is
And
there any cost associated with getting out of this and putting it in here? What's the cost to getting it on?
I don't believe there's any cost.
Okay.
We do that.
Didn't say there was.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
And I'm sorry, and I blame this because I think we're going down rabbit holes. I think this is a very straight, easy, forward question, and all we have to do is have a majority. I prefer two, I can live with one. Frankly, why don't we put it together to see what happens?
So someone form a resolution. Do you want to do that? Or a motion?
That we, secure the construction loan with a, I'm not sure that's the right wording, but go to a 2-year fixed rate at 1.53%.
On what amortization? 25-year, 20-year?
No, this is a 2-year. I don't think...
It's a temporary loan.
This is a temporary loan for 2 years, fixed 2-year term,
Well, he said interest and principal,
right?
so that means that we're amortizing it over some period, that the contract is for an interest rate for 2 years, but there will be a 20 or a 25-year amortization, and I'm not sure that's even listed in here.
Yeah, and that's a really good point to clarify, because I just thought they would have a calculation that would reduce it by some number, but that P&I would include it. So that's another thing that really needs to be clarified. But if you want to have a discussion on 20-year,
We had that, there was an analysis that Robert did, and you shared it with me.
I provided you a lot of.
I'm feeling like we don't have a recommendation from administration here as to what we should do. And that's not a criticism, Janice, but I think that's what needs to happen, is that there needs to be administrative analysis done and a recommendation made that says, and the board should give administration guidance, right? And that guidance could be in the form of the board prefers a 1-year term or a 2-year term. The board prefers a 25-year amortization under the following conditions and a 20-year under the following conditions. And that you then take that away and say, okay, what are we doing here, right? Like get all this stuff, put it in front of us.
Cost,
Yeah.
yeah.
So could I say that I am in favor of 2-year fixed rate, and I am strongly in favor of 20 years, not 25 years, because the interest costs over 25 years are significant.
Second. There was no motion. That was I'm in favor of.
So, well, just to add to that, it's very clear, now I worked with this for many, many years. 25-year debt is crazy expensive for interest. When I do calculations for this debt, it adds about $400,000 on it. That's very, very rough. But it adds about $400,000 worth of cost by going the extra 5 years. So in my mind, if in fact a 20 or 25-year thing has to be added, then we add a 20-year.
Yeah, I agree. It is about between $400,000 and $500,000.
So that represents about $1,000 a month over the term of 25 years.
Well, just so you know what I did is I just took the tables off of the MFA and calculated 20 and 25. And I actually gave them to one of the trustees back then. And I think I actually have them here, and the difference is phenomenal.
Yeah. So, but what it works out to over a 25-year term is we would then spend an extra $1,000 a month over the 25 years. You're right, it's still $400,000. But I guess what I don't know in that statement is what's the payment that a 20-year amortization generates versus what's the
I
payment?
do have that. When I gave you that information before, Robert had done a simple loan calculator for 25 versus 20 years. So the monthly payment on 25 years would be $16,038.59, and the monthly on 20 years is $18,872.27.
So $2,000 higher amount.
What was the budget?
Yeah, that's a very salient question.
$209,000 for this year. So I don't know how that fits because I don't know what the expenses are so far.
Well, what was the budgeted payment, I think is the question. Like the interest rate and the amortization period, what was it budgeted for?
It was higher than that, because the interest rate was higher than that. Yeah. So it was almost, it was 5 point something, so for sure, it's less than what was budgeted. Do you have a budget for it?
No.
Anyway, the bottom line is it's cheaper for the revenue.
Yeah.
So I think I'm hearing a consensus building towards 2-year and 20, over a 20-year amortization. And what I was thinking we're also hearing is we need to see it versus budget, right? So how did we form our 2020 budget and therefore our water rates? What were the calculations that went into that? And if a 2-year, 20-year amortization meets or exceeds or improves that position, that sounds like it would be a pretty good offer, but we need to see that, right? So what I'm wondering if the motion should be here is that the board approves in principle a 2-year fixed term loan amortized over 20 years, pending comparison to what was budgeted at time of the water commissioner, of the contracting order of the water treatment, or no, sorry, at time we set the water rates, the water tolls.
Second.
Okay, discussion.
We are currently paying an additional $36,000 a year for the construction loan. If we go with the 1.5 and get it done today, that saves us $3,000 a month. If we went with the 20-year, it's $2,000 a month more.
We're saving $1,000.
So we're saving $1,000 a month by fixing it to the 20-year 1.54.
Yeah.
So the sooner we get this done, the sooner we're saving money.
So I would suggest that we have a 2-week window here, right? Because we have a board meeting in 2 weeks, and that we should be revisiting this motion, because COW meetings don't finalize motions, board meetings do. And so let's make the motion here and say that it's pending an analysis from the administration comparing this decision to budget, or to water tolls calculations. You okay with that?
Well, I just want to know, sorry, it's really clear in my mind what we're asking the administration to do.
To get us the quotation for like all of the details. Here's the monthly payments on a 20-year amortization based on a 1.53% 2-year fixed term. And compare that to the calculations that were used to set water rates for 2020, because there would have been an interest rate and term assumption made.
Okay. You've already got a budget, right? So the budget says that that was the amount calculated for the amount of tolls you're going to raise. So in my mind, the question is, do we have enough money in the budget to accommodate that level of payment?
That's this year only. That's, to me, is a little bit short-term thinking, right?
Well-
And the budget was, when were we planning on the water plant coming on? It was in March, was it May? There's a lot of variables that go into that fixed number, right?
Well, there's no doubt about it. I mean, yes, we're going to be doing next year's budget, and we have to know what that number is. All I know is that we're currently paying 2.5, and it's $36,000 more a year than this one. Hopefully, there's enough flexibility in those numbers that will handle that. And I'm sorry, can I ask what number was it for 20 year?
It was 18 versus 16,000.
Yeah.
So 18 times 12. I don't do that in my head.
It's about 200.
216,000.
215,000, something.
Okay, so that's not far off what's in the budget now. And I don't know what the 5-year plan is, what we don't do 5
When you say in the budget, what's the number you're referring to? Financing charges or the cost of running the water plant? Because there's a lot of costs that are in there, right?
Yes, and that's going to be a surprise as well.
What I'm worried about is, why are we debating this when we can have the actual answer in 2 weeks?
No, I'm sorry, I'm not debating that. I'm just debating what number we should be looking at. For me, it's what's, not what the tolls have been set at, it's what's actually in the budget. And I'm looking at the debt number within the budget, which I believe is $209,000.
Debt servicing?
Yes.
Okay, I agree.
To me,
If that's the number, then I agree.
That's not enough to service the 18,000 a month. That's more than 209,000. 18.5?
Okay, but that's only for a quarter of this year. That's why getting the number is correct. We got to find out that.
Well, I'm just saying.
So there would be debt servicing on the construction loan too, right? So this is the analysis we need, guys.
Okay.
Is what did we budget for debt servicing costs for 2020 versus what have we paid already in debt servicing costs on the construction loan, and what will we pay under this proposed motion? And we need to have that so we can affirm our vote in 2 weeks. Now, the Royal Bank guys should be able to tell you that, right? Well, the budget part is ours, I guess.
So the other question, amortization for 20 years, can it be locked in? So that's exactly what we know we have for that 2 years. If and when this government study comes to an end, and we now know which direction we're headed, refinancing, that's going to have to get drug out again within 2 years so that we can set up for the final financing. Again, it might change in that time, who knows?
Yes. And I'm sorry, is the question if conversion is past yes,
Or
If
no?
it is or it isn't, in other words, say it isn't, this is hypothetical, but say it isn't, and we're moving forward the same way we are now, that means that 2 years is gonna be coming up shortly, and then we're gonna have to renegotiate again for the final whatever. The other way, of course, if it goes to the regional district, it's out of our hands. They will just take it over and do whatever they wish. Simple as that, and then they will decide.
So I think there's another question in there, which is, what is the 20-year interest rate if we were to lock it in now? Because that's, that's the risk-free approach.
Well, yes and no.
Yeah.
If we get conversion, I think we're talking 30 points better than the Fed at least.
No, it's just informational.
Yeah.
It's about 50. Last time I looked, it was 50. 0.5 of the interest rate, 0.5%.
Which is a lot for 20 years.
I don't know if we have enough information to do this.
Personally, I like your recommendation. Put the vote.
So the motion that I made was, and seconded, was that we tentatively approve or approve in principle locking into a 2-year fixed rate contract at 1.53% on a 20-year amortization, pending this further information and analysis of budget and soliciting of what the long-term rates look like now.
Second.
All in favor? Okay. So, new business item number 2 was motion to establish select standing committees for public works and fire department. As I recall, the discussion was more about appointing chairs of the select standing committees for public works and fire departments, who would then work to form appointments to those committees. Is that how everybody understands it? So if we make that motion, say, to appoint chairs for select standing committees for public works and fire department. Which shall we start with? The order they're in, public works.
May I just ask a clarification here? There actually isn't any standing committee, and this position, the way I read it last week, doesn't really function as a separate committee meeting all the time.
It hasn't in the time I've been on the board. Ted, you've been on, Ted and Suzanne, I guess Suzanne, you've been on the longest. Have you seen standing committees?
No, it has been, every year, 2 trustees are assigned and nothing happens. It's a mirage. There's never a meeting convened, there are never any minutes presented. And this is why one of Gary's very first recommendation is, in fact, and it arose out of this conversation that we had, because I brought this up at the last meeting, that the 2 standing committees have served no actual functional purpose. They've never actually worked on something. However, we have a very big deal right in front of us right now, conversion. And Gary's recommendation was, now there's a working committee, an advisory committee made up of landowners and a trustee to look at the conversion, and I agreed with that. And so my thought was that, sure, we can select 2 people to stand on these fictional committees, if we like. Personally, I think that's a waste of time based on my 4 years here. Instead, work on adopting a committee as per Gary's recommendation. Because to me, that's actually something that needs.
Let's separate these 2 things. The Gary piece has been added to the agenda. Let's talk about these standing. And so what I heard you say is
I'm not in favor of that.
You don't see utility in
No.
the standing committees
It's
for
done
fire.
nothing, well, it has done nothing for the past 4 years.
Well, it's because the committees actually weren't formed.
Correct.
People were assigned, trustees were assigned.
Trustees assign, and then they have to pick their committee members,
Yeah.
they have to get members of the public to come, and they have to get the administrator on that. Okay, so do we not want that? You don't even want to bother doing that, is that what you're saying? Or you want to do a select advisory committee?
To me, it
Put our
seems
efforts there.
redundant and useless, but fine, you can put names to it.
Because fire and water functioned without these committees, basically, for the last
They
4
have.
years. Is that what you're saying?
John?
Yeah, there has to be a purpose to it, and that's what I was getting at. If there's a purpose to it, great, let's have it, but if there's no purpose, then all the things you talked about, you wouldn't do that unless there's a purpose. So to me, it's purpose first, and then organizing it. And I'm just wondering if something does come up, we can do it.
Ted?
Okay, regarding committees and so on, standing committees for fire department and water. It's happened a couple of different times. I went with the fire department, I went with the water. With the fire department, basically, it was like I was a go-between. I would sit down with the fire chief, sit down with the deputy, etc., and go over things they needed. Go back to the CAO and say, okay, they want this, this, and this because these things need to be replaced. From there, he turned around and said, well, they need this, it's gonna cost that much. I said, yes, they need to replace this stuff. If it fails, it could be catastrophic. Again, he said, okay, then he gets a hold of the fire chief and the fire chief goes ahead. That's basically what it was.
So my thoughts on this, I'll give you second choice, I just want to speak. We do know we need a fire committee, we've already talked about it, and it was more specific to the fire truck than it was to a select standing committee. But I'm wondering why we wouldn't just form a select standing committee, because I do believe there is merit in having a structure that's focused on a service that says, okay, the board needs to approve this, the committee forms the request. And, the fire truck coming up, I believe that is a very good use and a good purpose associated with that committee. We've had a couple of examples of things recently that the committee could have helped Chief Ham with in terms of forming up requests. And with respect to public works, we've got some planning requests that are on the table from CBRD that are bringing more potential connections into our water system, and we'll start to hit the design point of the first DAF unit of the plant. So then you've got to start thinking about when you start planning the second DAF unit. And those things may or may not happen, but we're talking about conversion no sooner than July, right? And so we may need to see some work that's being done there, and just, coming to this room without that background being done can make things difficult. So I am in favor of us appointing people to chair those committees, but I'm only in favor of that if we go so far as to form the committees and make them functional, and to have regular meetings to say what's going on, what do we need to be considering, what do we need to be thinking ahead. So that's my John.
There's a couple of things here. First off, I think we only have one employee, and she's sitting right there. If we've got questions about operations, that's who we go to.
Don't understand that comment.
You don't understand the comment. Okay, standard local government, pretty set across the provinces, that boards and councils have one employee, and that's the administrator. If you have politicians going to staff members, it creates difficulties. If it doesn't create difficulty tomorrow or today, it will create it in the future. Always does, without fail. I'm dealing with that right now. But my comment is, I have no problems with the fire department thing. But I think one of the changes you guys made was to get water staff and fire staff to come on a regular basis to these meetings, not these meetings, but the board meeting, to give updates. I would much prefer that they bring their issues to that table than to have to filter it through a board member. I'm not casting any aspersions on any board member. I sort of mentioned this last week, that I want us collectively to hear what the issues are, and not individually.
Thank you.
And for specific things like the fire department, I know that's a major thing. I have no issues with that being a standing committee.
Other comments?
No, I have to agree with Trustee France on that. I think it makes it much simpler. We do have the fire chief coming and giving a report, and also Dan coming and giving a report at our board meetings. That's a big difference. That enlightens the board, that gives us the information that we can glean. And the standing committee for a large item, like a $500,000 fire truck, yeah, I can understand something like that, where you could have the fire chief, you could have 2 or 3 civilians sitting in a committee discussing it and bringing it forward to the board. The rest of it is soup to nuts, it's everyday expenses. The CAO that we had before did not trust the fire chief spending
Let's
money.
not speak of individuals.
I'm not speaking of individuals. This is prior to what we have now.
Right, but let's not reference
But I'm just saying,
capabilities of individuals.
yeah, but I'm just saying that that has changed. And now the fire chief can basically go out and do the things that he should normally be able to do within reason. And the other thing is no longer with us, which is good. So I think it's running really very smoothly.
Pete?
I think I'm in favor of having real working committees, because I've had the experience that they're extremely helpful, and they inform the board, and the board can make informed decisions from the work the committees do. So I would be probably in favor of it. I haven't said that I don't chair one. But anyway, the other thing is I do absolutely think and support the select advisory committee being formed immediately. That to me is more important, because that is a pressing issue, a really pressing issue, and I think it would be nice to do that, but that's just my opinion at the moment.
So, Trustee Culture.
I just want to reiterate that the function of this, whatever committees we determine, is not a go-between between staff, between public works staff and the board, and that's where the conflict of interest can rise. If it's a working committee, it's far more appropriate for the fire department to present a budget, as they have done, and a request for funding. It should not be a go-between between one trustee and state. That's really, I want to caution against that. And that has been the practice in the past, and that has been inappropriate in my opinion, and I'm not willing to participate in that kind of a setup any further.
My thoughts are in line. I support having the committees, particularly the fire. Like, I don't think there's any question that we need to have a fire committee right now, just because there is such a large item on deck. And so I mentioned earlier, I believe that there will be large items on deck for the water plant as well. But I'd support both Trustee France and Trustee Cavender and Trustee Harrelson all saying that this is not about day-to-day. Like, we have the ability to get monthly status reports, and they are helpful. To me, this is about strategic planning, budgeting, large projects, doing the research, forming recommendations for big decisions. And if we were to form the committees, I'd want them formed on that basis. End of my thoughts. Other thoughts? John?
I'm wondering if you cast the net a little bit wide there. I'm absolutely in favor of having a standing committee for a special project like buying a truck. But in terms of developing the budget and in terms of strategic planning, I think that belongs here.
But it doesn't preclude it living here. The standing committees report to the board, so they are recommending to the board action. So it's a way of distributing the workload in order to form recommendations that the board can vote on. That's my opinion. You know, certainly a budget comes together from Public Works, and a budget comes together from a fire department, and a budget comes together from administration. And these things all get added up and turned into tolls and parcel taxes, and we compare them to the previous year, and we say, can we afford that? And we exercise good governance when we see the total of it. And we may then go back to the standing committees and say, too rich, right? We need to find a different way to do it. But how do we get the quality inputs without giving some additional support to it? With no disparagement to the staff, and they do a great job for us, right?
Does the fire budget go through the administrator?
Administration rolls up the budget.
And so you're negotiating water, you're negotiating with water, you're negotiating with the fire department on the budgets.
What do you mean by negotiating?
Well, I mean, going through the budgets and making sure there's nothing wacky or numbers that add up or questioning expenditures, that sort of thing. It has to happen at some level within administration and not just the person presenting the budget.
Right, has to come together because a budget results in a toll. Right, and that's where it ends up. Like, you know, what we budget for is costs, and then we say, okay, how do we tax to recover that? And we don't want to tax excessively or be the Cadillac or one of those kinds of things, right?
Yeah, limits.
Yeah. The day-to-day stuff, if we're on agreement, that's not what it's for. It's for budget and it's
I'm not
for...
worried about that, but anyway.
Okay, okay, that's fine, we can talk about that. But if it's for the high-level things, like a budget and a fire truck, strategic planning, I can live with that. But not as a vote.
Eve, do you want to comment on that? About the day-to-day part?
I don't think that because you have these staff, I don't believe that these committees would be just to form work on big things. I think they're for the day-to-day, get to know your fire department and know what their needs are and report back to the board. And of course the administrator has to be at all these meetings, or they were anyway. And they take notes, and they're a formal way for the board to be informed, and also certain board members and members of the public, the people that are on the committee, can have takeaways and do work, and actually do stuff, and help. And it's not all on one administrator, and actually that's the way I see it. Any sane way of happening, that's the way I see it. Nobody going behind the seat and talking to the guy quietly, or none of that. It's an official committee that reports on all things fire department and things, creative things happen about it. And you know, it's not, it doesn't have to be such a big deal. It's just a working committee.
So it'd be a question for clarification. As we have a report from the chief on a monthly basis now, would that continue to happen under your vision, or would it come from the working committee?
In my vision, there's two representatives from the fire department, the chief and someone else, and they present, the chief has a report and he presents it. And then at the board meetings, the summary reports from the water and the fire are read at each board meeting by the chair of the committee. They take ownership of that. You're not usurping the board. The board makes all the decisions. No decisions are made. They're advised by the committee.
I'm just checking down this side here to see if there's any comments.
Now you're doubling up. You're having two people speaking for one thing. Fire chief basically was giving the report because he's the one that's there on the scene all the time. Now, if you're going to bring take over that duty.
The fire chief reads his reports at the board meetings?
Yes, he does.
Oh, that never happened when I was a board member. The
Well,
fire
yeah.
chief didn't come to the board meeting.
I know, now they do.
Now they do, okay, well.
That's why I'm saying they're doubling up and not necessary.
Well, I didn't
Whereas a
know why.
committee for a specific thing, like trustee France stated, a large item like a $500,000 fire truck, yeah. They're a standing committee to sit down with the fire chief and go over everything regarding the
Yeah, it
future
wouldn't
fire
exclude
truck.
it.
That would be the thing to do. But
Yeah, I
day to day, I don't think would be a good idea. No, this is volunteer stuff. So
Volunteer.
unless you're gonna start paying people,
They are paid on call, right? And the chief is paid, correct?
yes, that's correct, but a standing committee with volunteers aren't. So here's the thing, how much time are they gonna spend? You know, the fire department. You see what I'm trying to get at?
Yeah, I guess, but
I have
I
a
mean.
hard time with
the
standing
people who
committees.
decide to be on the committee, decide to give their time to the fire department in this community.
Yeah.
What we're debating is how do you form the charter of the committee? Like, what is it in charter, what is in scope, what is out of scope?
Exactly.
Susanna, did you have a comment?
No, I'm aware of the time and I'm aware that we have a lot of other issues yet to discuss.
Okay.
I'm feeling frustrated. I'm through some pretty straightforward things.
Well, the motion is a lot different than what we started talking about. If we want to have a special committee to form to deal with the fire truck issue, that's one thing, and I'm fine with that one. It doesn't sound like there's any real support for these standing committees, and I'm fine with, since you've functioned as a board without them for a long time, well, for years, 6 years or something, I'm fine without it too.
Let me try to move towards closure then. This is not a shut it down, but this is an attempt. Let us make two motions. Motion to appoint, or that's not the right, to form a select standing committee to support the fire department. Second. Any other seconds? Okay. Do we want to vote or do we want to discuss just, do we want to form a select committee, select standing committee for the fire department? All in favor?
Sorry, you asked me what I wanted to talk about. The only thing that I've got is to do what?
Okay. To form a select standing committee to focus on strategic planning and large projects. And I need to say that loosely, large and important issues associated with the fire department. But that does not include his day-to-day activities. So, motion to form a standing select committee on that basis. All in favor? Okay. Motion to form a public works standing committee on that same basis. Second.
I'll second that.
Discussion.
Yes. Okay, no, I've heard from trustees who said that nothing happened in 4 years. Now we're asking them to do strategic planning, which we should be doing, I get that. But we're creating a committee, 2 committees, and now we're creating an administration for those 2 committees. I'd like to know whether or not we have the resources to commit to that expansion of duties.
So you want to go back and do the voting on the other one?
No, I think, I'm going to guess and say the focus of that first one is going to be fire trucks. I get that, and one should be done for that.
How about a fire hall?
I'm a fire.
No, the fire hall is even bigger. And maybe the resolution could be a third resolution saying that staff bring back a few ideas on how to structure these committees so that their time and efforts are taken into consideration when we're doing this, because you know, if you have to do agendas and you have to do the minutes, that's going to take time. And I'm still not sure if I'm probably going to get back here. And I still want to see the fire chief and the water guy here every meeting, because I want to be able to hear his report and talk to him. So as long as it's not taken away from that, I'm happy.
Motion's on the floor, and second. Any other comments? So, all in favor? Forming, this is the Public Works Committee. So we had 3 for and 2 no votes, or unless you, I should say, all against. Okay.
Subsequent motion?
Fire.
That we ask staff to report back to us on whether or not we have the resources to support regular meetings of both these committees, subcommittees, select committees. It's a little bit putting the cart before the horse, but I'm sorry, I'm a bureaucrat, and I know when you add these things, it takes away from something else, it has to.
I'm kind of only, the work has to be done.
Well, I know, but you can't ignore it, Mr. Chair. You can't ignore it.
No, I'm talking about the work that these committees need to do. Like, we need to know when we're going to be cracking the ground for the next staff plan. We have 170 homes or something like that that are currently on development permits right now. If they were to all be built, and they won't be built immediately, that taps out our existing DAF unit. We're there, right? Like, we need to do this work. We need a fire truck. We need a plan for a firewall. Like, so, like, I'm kind of going, like, we gotta do this. We gotta figure it out, right? And if that says we are understaffed, then we have to figure that out too.
So who are the 2 trustees for these 2 committees that you've just formed?
We haven't done that.
Okay, could we move on to that, please?
So trustee France proposed a motion. Was there a seconder for that motion? Or shall we vote anyways, seeing how it's just a simple thing? Let's vote. All in favor of having it and then report back on how the staff is? Are you going to form it? Or do you want to withdraw it? What do you?
I'm looking to our administrator. You know me, well, you should know me by now, I'm part bureaucrat, right? So I want to know where you have time to do all this stuff, or do you need more resources?
I don't know. I don't know what's involved here, what you're asking.
We'll figure it out. We have to figure it out, right? Like there's no known answer.
Yeah, that's a really good answer, but it's also a troubling answer. That's fine, we'll carry on, I have no problem with that. Just be
So
aware.
my frustration is this, right? Is it's saying, okay, so we don't have the resources to do it, so we won't do it. And it's the most important stuff we can do, which
No one
is
said
plan ahead.
that. Sorry, Mr. Chair, no one said that. What someone said was we should identify whether or not we have the resources, and then address that question
To do what?
to support these 2 committees.
And what are they going to do, right? We've talked about that. We don't know what the schedule is. We don't know what resources are going to be required. Why don't we just go and see what happens, right? And say if there is a need for additional resources, we'll have to address it. And at that point in time, addressing it can be cut back on committee members or committee frequencies, those kinds of, there's all kinds of things that come up, right? But we can get paralyzed in this right now. Whether to have a committee or not. We've voted for committees. And now we're voting to say, can we afford the committees? So, what's the motion?
There is no motion for me.
Thank you.
Are we picking the chairs now?
Yes. So, nominations for chair of the fire department standing select committee. Nominations. I'll stand. Trustee Haroldson nominates himself. Anybody else want to do that?
For fire?
Yeah. All in favor of Trustee Haroldson? Okay, Trustee Haroldson is the board appointee to the fire department select standing committee. Nominations for the trustee or the public works select standing committee.
Volunteer.
Trustee John France has stood for nominating himself. Any other nominations? All in favor of trustee France? Okay. Okay, next motion to appoint Myers Norris Penny, is it MNP, right? As our auditors for the 2020 year. So that's the motions on the floor. Second?
Second.
Okay, any discussion?
Yep. I don't think, I'm guessing, I don't think we have to discuss it a lot because we don't know what's happening. But I know we pay a lot more for audits than I've seen elsewhere. So I don't know if it's been tendered lately, but that's something we should look at down the road if in fact conversion doesn't go through. But for now, it's just a comment.
Okay. Janice, do you have any comment on it? Do you know when the last time auditors was tendered?
M&P's been the auditor for
Many years.
And how do the fees change year to year?
They go up, not a great amount, but, you know, they put a lot of time in this time because it was remote. So will that be reflected in next year? I don't know.
I mean,
I just want to make sure we have everybody else has comments. Any other comments?
I think John has a good point. Do we just audit, do they ever give us, I don't remember, we just automatically bid them every year. As any, have you ever taken tenders for other auditors, for other companies in the last little while?
It hasn't been done for a long time. So might be a good idea to put out there and get some bids. See what the difference is.
and I'm sorry to be clear, I'm not saying this year.
No, in the future.
But I would say that I know what the audit cost from, say, it was $500,000 and the budget's bigger. So having said that, you have to be able to compare apples and apples with audits, and maybe they do more work here. I just don't know, and that's something that administration could tell us. Some audits come in and says, we do here's the financials, boom, do them. Those are probably cheaper, but if you have to come in and do a lot of the accounting work, you know, the technical stuff, then it's gonna cost you more. Anyway, you know what, that's about it.
Well, we're what, 4 months from the end of the year, right?
Exactly.
Yes, ready to vote.
Yeah. Okay. All in favor of the motion as stated? Okay. Approved. Passed. Carried. Okay, update on utilities billing arrears collections.
Good news.
You all read it? You want me to read it?
I'd like you to sort of speak to what you think.
Let me summarize it.
Yeah.
We were advised by Gary not to cut off anybody's water due to the optics. But, you know, we have to follow the bylaws, and we did actually get down to cutting off one resident's water, and he came in and paid in cash today. So it's very effective. We ran into one problem with a group home that the owner wouldn't pay the water bill, and we were not going to cut the water off to the group home. So we have sorted that situation out. And I had to threaten, we're going to cut it off, and he paid today. So
Of these 17 letters that went out, all have been solved? Is that correct?
yes, they have. And most of them paid in full. There's a few payment plans that had been arranged, but most paid in full. So it was very effective.
And what about the parcel tax?
That's next. And along with the discussions with people about their water bills, it was discussed that their parcel tax are outstanding, and that's a much more aggressive collection plan, so that's happening next. The collections have been quite time consuming, chasing the people up, but, yeah, so we're starting on the parcel tax collections, which is a quicker process.
So in terms of the arrears, how many days in arrears are we now, or whatever measure you want to use? Like,
How many days?
so, typical measurement of this stuff is, our accounts receivable are 2 months billings now. Like,
Yeah, most people are current, except for these extreme arrears. So what we're going to do is, every time we issue water bills, we will send a statement out to anyone who is behind, to try and stay on top of it. That's the plan.
So do you know how many people are in arrears then?
At this point, at the time we started the collections, there were 17.
Okay, right, but you've gotten it down to.
Yes.
You're not sure exactly yet.
No, because, we've had another cycle of water bills.
So the 8 homeowners that arrange substantial payments, does that mean so that there are partial payments, those are the payment plans?
Most of them paid, for instance, today, the person paid over $2,000 and another $200 is coming next week, and he will be paid in full.
Okay.
So,
That's good.
So you're substantially current?
sorry?
Are we largely current?
Yes.
now? Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. And parcel taxes are actually next. Okay.
That's-
Trustee Friends.
Apology for the approach. I think it's nice to be very sensitive with this sort of thing. Just to be clear in my mind, this is the total of all taxes outstanding for Union Bay River District. There's nobody in the tax bill that ain't worth that.
No, this is water bills.
Water bills.
The parcel taxes is the other.
Sorry, I'm referring to, yes. So that is really good. I mean, you're pretty well up to date.
Yeah.
One thing that would be really handy for me, and actually now that you're so up to date, is to see what the actual dollar amounts are. I mean, to me, that puts the net on it, right? If we're talking a couple $100, then I know the size and extent of the issue.
Yes, some of them were, one in particular was over $5,000, but he was entitled to a leak allowance. So he gathered all this information together.
Yeah, and I'm sorry to hear on that. I don't need to know individual amounts. I'd like to know the total amounts. Like what we're talking about from time to time in terms of collections. Okay, so just, again, just
That was a previous sort of motion direction, right? Was to keep the board apprised of arrears.
Yeah, and then,
And the balances, right?
yeah, so once all the payments are posted, because a lot of them came in yesterday and today, like the next meeting, we'll have accurate
Awesome.
AR numbers that will show you clearly.
Now, through the chair, I wish to thank you, Janet. You were able to collect all these water tolls over a very short period of time since you started this. And we didn't have to do a collection agency to do it. That saved us time and money right there. So, thank you.
Cutting off water is very effective too. No, we're starting collections on parcel tax next.
move receive the report.
What's that?
Move receive the report.
I still haven't heard the question.
Move receive the report.
Okay. Second to that, just receiving the report.
Second.
All in favor? Okay, motion to revisit the referendum question as proposed by Dan Wong. And this is from our inaugural meeting where we said we would solicit input from the ministry, right? So we approved it pending input from the ministry. And I just need to find, here it is here, right? So I'm going to read what Catherine Lee sent back to us when I asked her the question. She said, I sent my thoughts on this question to Dan and Janice yesterday. I've copied my response below. I think your wording for the referendum question makes sense, as long as the public information sessions very clearly outline what transferring services, assets, and liabilities to the CBRD means and what the current services, assets, and liabilities are. I say this because in my experience with local government referendum questions, less can be more. If people do not understand or agree with part of the question, they may not vote, so it's best to keep the question very simple and concise if possible. The only example I could find of a referendum question for improvement district service conversion was, are you in favor of conversion to the XXX regional district? This is obviously very simple. I think this question was asked at a special meeting or AGM, so it's likely information about conversion had been given and discussed directly before the vote happened, so perhaps not good for UBID situation. You could also take part of what was said in the Sandwick Improvement District resolution and ask, are you in favor of dissolving Union Bay Improvement District and converting to Comox Valley Regional District local service areas? So that's Catherine's input. And if I were to sum up what I think she said was, her guidance is to find a way to shorten the question in some way. And we did discuss that last time. In fact, we've discussed questions that were very similar to the suggestions that Catherine has made here. And so I guess in light of this input, should we revisit the longer worded question and replace it with a shorter worded question? And if so, what would that be? So I guess we would have to, I don't know if we have to reverse our motion because it did say pending input from the ministry, and we now have that. So, should we start with, should we, okay, you want to just discuss it around once before we go to motion? Suzanne, did you want to say something?
I was going to make a motion.
Okay, fire if you want.
So I move that we, following what we had said, which was pending, that based on Catherine's feedback to us, which was very valuable, that the question be modified slightly to read, are you in favor of dissolving the Union Bay Improvement District and converting to the Comox Valley Regional District local service area, question mark. That's the last sentence that she gives. It's not quite as simple as her first one, and she cautioned us on I don't think.
So, can I just stop for a second? You put a motion out, so let's get a second and then discussion. So, motion's out there. I'll second it. Okay, so discussion.
So, I'm very cognizant of her statement about, are you sure about her caution about when people are unclear about a section of it, a long, wordy, detailed question, then they may just not vote. So I understand what she's saying. I don't think so. That's why I go with eliminating the words asset and liabilities. I think we are doing, we're in the process of disseminating that information, but I don't think we're there yet. For example, I don't think the landowners really understand how much of our water mains need replacing and how big a job that is. Partly because the board has not had a chance to really go into that in depth because we've been flying by the seat of our pants building a water treatment plant. But those are very important. 65% of our water mains are going to need replacing in the next 10 years. That's a massive project requiring massive amounts of money. So we need to do more as a board in this process of conversion in laying those issues on the table. And that will come naturally through in our process of budgeting.
Let's stay with the issue at hand here, okay? We're into Gary's question.
Speaking to the motion, I think the last sentence, are you in favor of dissolving and converting to the CBOD, is clear and yet simple. That's why I like it. Kind of is a mix between the two.
Eve, any comments?
Well, I changed my mind after the last meeting. I thought about it and I actually talked to some neighbors and whatever. I'm in favor of the simplest possible question. Like, are you in favor of conversion? I'm in favor of that. That's just changed my mind anyway. But and I would be open to that as depends on how everyone else feels too.
John?
Question?
Discussion of the motion that's on the floor.
I'm ready to vote.
Ted?
Well, short and simple is one thing. On the last statement that Catherine wrote, again, we argue in favor of dissolving the Union Bay Improvement District and converting the Comox Valley Regional District to local service area. That says it all really, and I don't think that's going to stop a person from voting. They're going to vote the way they feel in the end. And I think that's the one that I put in there. It says it all, and then it's up to the voter, to the landowners to decide which direction they want. And I can live with that. So,
I don't have any further comments. Like I asked for this feedback. Take the guidance as directed. Right? So, if there's no other comments from anybody else, we're going to put this to a vote as the motion made by Trustee Collier. All in favor of the motion as stated? Okay, unanimous. We will use the question that was at the end of Catherine Lee's memo as read by Suzanne. Okay, 3 development update proposals, updates on the proposals. And what I'd ask, because we can get into these in a heck of a lot of detail, right? Is I'm really interested in what is needed of the board as we look at these, right?
This is for information purposes only. So I forwarded these to Gary.
And can I ask one question before we say too much here? Is there anything about these that would be confidential, or is this information already in the public? I believe it's already in the public domain. I'm going to ask John just because he's in this. These are developments.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't know what we're talking about.
They look like these guys.
proposals.
They should be in
It's
your
in the
package.
package.
When did these come to the?
Okay, that's what I want to talk about.
When did?
Okay.
One,
I didn't see it.
the first one,
Which one you
I
talking?
don't see anything that says.
the one from the RD, from the regional district. The other two, the black headings, are from the MOT, Ministry of Transportation. So this one just arrived. These arrived sometime in June, and they gave us 30 days to give an opinion, which never happened. So I sent them to Gary and I said, now what do we do? And
Are they requests for water service for these developments? Is that what they are?
These are zoning
They want-
reapplications.
yeah, they want
We don't have zoning power.
So, if you look at, they're asking for our comments on this application.
So what I've done is, I've forwarded them on to our engineer, because he has an educated opinion on this. We don't have an engineer on staff, and that was from advice from Gary. And Public Works has it, and the fire department has it. So they are going to give their opinions. We send that back, and that's what's required of us. That's all that's required.
Okay, I'm confused. Ones that were sent out in June, there's really, can we talk about them one by one?
Let's not refer to it, just because we're being careful with confidential information, let's not name them, okay? Because I don't have the answer to that question. I'm sorry I didn't ask it before.
I don't think it's in camera. I think this is a referral document. And nothing I've seen so far says, keep it confidential. Sorry, I just don't see it.
Yeah, I don't either, because I'm just being overly cautious. Okay.
So Gary advised me to just put it on the agenda as an update for your information. You are not required to do anything, but at least you know that these have been put forward for an opinion. It's not an opinion from the board.
They were put forward to who? To the board?
To the administrator.
Just to the administrator?
And then the administrator forwards them to the engineer, the fire department, and public works. So this is just for your information.
And the way I interpret this is for us to be aware of how fast we're seeing new lots being built within the improvement district or what's on the slate. And one of these has 114 lots. Another
Double
has,
occupancy.
what's that?
And they're
Potential double occupancy lots, they're CR1 lots, right? That can have a carriage house on them.
Yeah.
And then there's another for 38 Bearland strata and another 5 freehold lots. So there's 43 and 114 plus 114. So there's a possibility of 228 plus 43, so 271 new water connections here. Nice news about that is, you know, the CACs are, I would assume that a CAC for a double connection is only one. Like if there's a carriage house, it's one connection. Right, so there's one.
Yeah, because we do have some properties with more than one residence on it, but they're not subdivided.
Right, so that's one property and there's one CAC. So there's 114, so there's
9,800 times.
Well, except that our CACs are lower for strata corps. I think they're in the 7,000 range. Yeah, for strata corps, and 58 of these lots are strata corps. It's fairly. See that?
This brings to mind a long overdue conversation that we as a board need to have. So if these development proposals are approved, the next step is they come to Union Bay to ask for water hookup. There was a lot of work that went into, that went into the Union Bay subdivision bylaw, which needed updating, and that it went all the way through committee to 2 readings, as well as a legal review, and then that subdivision bylaw just stalled. I think the water treatment plant took precedence, which is understandable. However, now that we're talking about our water mains and hooking up large numbers, I think it is important for us to have an up-to-date and current subdivision bylaw. As our water superintendent Danny has expressed many times, Kilmarnock is a relatively new subdivision with all kinds of water main problems. I do not want to be part of a board that approves developments that do not follow an updated subdivision bylaw. So I'm making a motion that we review, that we bring that forward. A lot of work, including the legal opinion, was done. 2 years worth of committee work was done on a new subdivision bylaw. I think it fits with strategic planning down the road. It also behooves us, even if we convert, one of the questions that comes up in conversion is, what bylaw, like, are we going to use the CBRDs? Who's,
So you're making a motion, right?
yeah.
So you're
So I'm
moving,
making a motion and I believe it's called subdivision bylaw 263, that we review that, including the legal opinion.
it's 234.
Is it? 234?
Amending bylaw 176, and it was 2004.
Yeah, no. This was work that was done while I was trustee.
What I'm saying is that's the existing, the bylaw that we have that's called subdivision water regulation.
Well, there was an amended bylaw that had a different number.
But it didn't get passed.
No, but it doesn't matter, it still exists, and we had a legal opinion on it. It just was put aside, so I'd like to revisit that.
Okay, so so you want to, the motion is to,
To bring that subdivision bylaw forward, along with the legal opinion, and look at it. As a board, review it, that maybe we want to look at this.
okay, so there's a motion on the table. Second? Okay, discussion.
Question.
Go.
What does this, is this to do with, the subdivision bylaw has to do with what? The water infrastructure that the developers must comply with, or what?
That's my understanding. We have, yes.
There's a standard industry-wide set of instructions that already exists. Is that not what they would have to go? They have to do our own separate bylaw?
Some of the stuff that's in this bylaw is about security deposits and that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Security deposits.
Well, no, it's about, it's very technical. It's like, yeah.
And I think what you're saying is,
I don't want to speak about it without having it in front of me, but I think we need to, that's part of being fiscally responsible.
Yeah, okay, so you've already done work in the past.
Yeah, the board did considerable work, 2 years of work.
Proper installation, exactly.
And a full legal opinion. It would be very useful of the proposed subdivision. So I don't want to reinvent the wheel. That was a huge amount of work that was put aside because we had a water treatment plant to build.
all right, trustee Prince.
At this stage of the game, I don't think you can do anything with that bylaw other than review it, because this application is already in process. And if we're going to get legal, the first thing to get legal is if we go ahead and start changing the bylaw, does it actually have any effect on this development? I'm suspecting it does not. Because once it's in play, what it does is it stops local governments from trying to change the game in the middle of the development process. And I hope you all, that's kind of fair issue, right? And I think that's what's happening here. I have no issue with reviewing it, but I think timing is just not right. But I'll tell you what I mean, I go on to, I don't know what this, like I know what it is, but I'm not getting a real good feel on what it entails, especially the demands on our systems. And I don't know the timing of that in terms of when we actually have to cough up the water. We've already got a bylaw in place, so that's going to govern what they do, and that should be all at their cost. I just kind of curious about what kind of a commitment it does. If this goes through the zoning, what commitment it makes us give them once this whole thing is approved. This is very much in the beginning stages. They still have to go through public hearings to much other things.
Mr.
But I'm
Chair,
just
I can answer
unclear.
that question. Under the master water agreement, it's all in there stating how much they can build before they have to stop and go over a review, as well as the flow of the water from the lake and all the rest of it. And the DAF plant, when it comes to having another DAF plant added to the one we already have, plus another tower for water, that is up to the developer to pay for both.
So the interesting thing here is that of the lots that are being brought forward, only 63 of them are covered by the water infrastructure agreement. Because the other 114/228 are a new development.
Right.
So they're not covered by the water infrastructure agreement, but might actually impact the plant at a quicker rate.
And I can also speak to one of them. It is above the water treatment plant. So they don't have access to water, period. Unless they put in their own water treatment plant, their own pumps. They're just too far up.
Which one are you talking about? This one or the other one?
It would be the ones at the top of the cloud.
And the way I read it is the zoning requires them to have access to water.
Yes.
I'm sorry, what?
The way I read it is the zoning requires them to have access to water, so they have to figure it. It's off Green Road.
Yes, in the top.
It's off Green.
Correct. So Danny is offering his opinion that they have no water.
Unless they do something with something. Unless they do their own project.
So will we be getting a copy of Danny's opinions or whatever feedback? Would we be?
And
I think it would come in his updates.
do they not get onto assure that if they have,
That's what they're doing right now.
so they're not even looking to us for water, they know that that's not possible?
No, they're asking for the opinion.
Asking
That's
for
what the
opinions.
drainage district is asking for.
Opinion as to whether we can provide them with water?
Well, no, they're just saying comment. Right. And
Yes, so the flip side of that would be on fire department. They-
Till October 9th.
So the answer.
But there's a 30-day period that Gary
He
also
will
provides asking for more.
ask for the fire chief,
Do
ask
we have
for
one
the
here?
engineer.
I have to ask. Janice, did you ask for more time?
I will be, yes.
So
I have emailed them, yes,
you've asked for more.
yes. Especially the ones from June.
Would it be crazy to ask Jody to come and talk to us?
Again, it's not, this is board update only, right? So I think there's an admin to admin function here that says, like, what are we governing, right? We're saying, oh, we can't deliver water.
If I may, and this relates back to the last meeting. I have no idea where this project's at, and I know you brought out that that's really not our business, but I'm sorry, I think it is our business.
Which project are you talking about?
Little EMA space. I think it's our business to know roughly what's happening over there. I don't need to know the exact details, but I would like to know the number of units, the timing, where they're at with their project, and probably a few other questions. I know nothing of that. From these maps, I can't even tell which properties they are.
There's semi-annual updates or interlocks between the CBRD board and the UBID board. Right, so that's the last one happened in July,
Yep.
I think, right? So there should be one due in January where we are all invited to a joint meeting with CBRD where things like Union Bay Estates and plans are discussed.
Okay, and they then know the status of this project?
Well, that's where we first heard about these two development permits, the 58 and the 5, was at that meeting. And we also heard about the gravel pit that's up McLeod Road. That's the process for this, is that we go through regular interlocks. So, any other, like, is there anything the board wants to do with this, right? Like, to me, it's information only. It says to me the need for standing piece becomes more apparent as we start to see this development happening in our area. So, good job on that.
Can I make a motion that we put it off to the next meeting for a decision?
Put what up?
The decision on what we want to say in the referral?
But it's not our decision as a board.
Well, they're asking us for comments,
They're asking the administration for comments.
which is the board.
The administration, it's different.
So why is it here?
Information to tell you what's going on.
Just trying to be transparent so you're aware of these three developments.
Let me say this about that. I have never worked for a local government where a referral wasn't given to the board or council for a comment, because it has political implications. It's not just administrative. And I'm certainly not prepared to do that. However, if the board decides it doesn't want to comment, then I will go on.
I will take your guidance on that. What does the rest of the board think? Do we need to comment on this? Or do we need our staff and our engineers to comment?
I would like to know what is being commented via our superintendent, because we need to be informed, so that's my first ask.
This should be informed.
So that we know what a comment was made with regards to, do we have enough water? I think the board needs to know that. That's what I'm asking.
I would agree that if the board isn't going to actually discuss this and get to know them and offer our own opinions and concerns, then at least we need to know what our what her employees are telling them.
Yeah, and I may be off base on this one, like, this may in fact be governance, and that I'm misinterpreting it, right? So I'm happy for you to tell me I'm wrong. You know,
And I'm just basing what I'm doing on what Gary recommended. He said, this is the process. You know, that I presented to you as an update for information only.
does the board want to approve the comments? We do, we have to meet again perhaps before October 9th.
You just want to know what they are.
That's your vote on that. That's one understood.
I think as far as the flows are concerned, Dan said the amount of water that's going through our gas plant, the flows are very low. And with this amount of construction that's going on, it's really not going to go overboard as far as the flows are concerned. There's plenty of water during this first phase. But again, I think Danny can turn around and make that in his report at a board meeting. You can turn around and set your mind at ease when it comes to the amount of buildings that are going up and the amount of flow. But as it stands right now, our flow through our DAP plant is very low. We can flow up 4 times what we're doing now, like another 4 union bays.
I don't think that's true, but not according to the infrastructure, or sorry, the governance study.
Yeah, we'd like to limit our comments to facts, please.
Yeah, okay.
Let's also stay on the topic of this development.
As I say, this development is just beginning, and if you're concerned about the flows, the guy to talk to is Danny.
I don't agree with that entirely, Dan.
Well, I do.
Definite opinion about things.
Let's not discuss
So basically-
employees in that manner at these meetings, please.
My question is then that we were just given these pieces of paper and we could take them home and read them and find out what they said.
What's happening. And the engineer will be offering his professional opinion on these
The engineer is,
courses, engineers. Because we don't have an engineer on staff.
so it's a firm that you're talking about, that engineer.
Okay, John?
Not a certain person.
That builds the plant.
Sorry, can we get some more? Let's have one discussion, please.
Sorry, 2 questions. Is the course actually give an opinion on this?
Not yet, no.
Are they?
They are.
They
And
are.
we'll get that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Second thing is, I just got it, and I gotta get my head around it, and so I can't give an opinion today. So, it's up to the rest of you to decide what you wanna do with it, and whatever you wanna do with it, you know, wrong with it. What I would like to see is that, they be asked if we can put off our, whatever comments we're gonna make until after our next meeting, and at least give us a chance to look at this, and I'm gonna ask a few questions. I mean, I do have some contacts in planning, and I wanna learn a little bit more about the process and what's expected of us. My comments about the political part of it is on major issues within the community, the politicians are asked for comments. And I'm pretty sure that's what's being asked for here, because it's a major issue. Having said that, I'm still unsure about the width and breadth of it, and that's what I want to look into. But anyway, that's my point.
So I think what I'm hearing is we want this to come back in 2 weeks. Will we have any opinions within 2 weeks?
Sure.
And at that point in time, the board may have an opinion to express, is that what I'm hearing? And we could express that in the form of resolution if we wanted to. That, you know, the board objects or whatever, or the board supports, based on what we hear back. You know, it's an interesting one in that our jurisdiction is over water and fire and street lighting, right? But obviously, big subdivisions have an impact on those sorts of things, so we can talk about things. Okay, is that perfect?
Are we paying for this, especially for this?
And normally bigger or, like Sandwich or whatever, they would have an engineer on staff, and we don't have that.
Well, regional district would have an engineer.
That's right.
Yeah.
Regional district.
So that's not
Yeah, the bigger,
We just have to pay out of pocket.
I find it unusual that they're asking us to do something we have to go pay for to.
Well, it's part of our due diligence.
yeah.
And we know what happens when we don't. We end up with very bad agreements.
I just may add that usually when the organization asks for a subdivision, there is a fairly big fee up front to pay for staffing time. I'm unclear if it pays for engineering, but yes, we don't have any money coming to us, right, so we have to cover that ourselves.
I think we need to know. I want to hear from an expert. I don't want second guessing. I don't want just wishful thinking about how much flow we have.
And I agree with that, but I don't know how much of that really impacts on us. That's the question I want to ask. They may be saying 247 wouldn't have got me. We've got an agreement here. If that agreement cuts it off, then it doesn't matter what the plan says. Well, no, I shouldn't say that. I should say that all we've committed to is X number. If they've got 247 in their plan, then that's something they have to work towards within the master agreement. That's the way I'm reading it. That's right. This doesn't commit us to 247.
Can I say we should move on from this one? I think we've covered it.
Do we have a resolution?
There was no need.
There's no need of a resolution here. We're saying basically, well, we've provided feedback to the administrator that we would like to see the opinions expressed at the next board meeting.
Okay.
To be presented as part of maybe as a special report, right? So the administrator report, but there'd be a subdivision report or whatever. And we can accept that report as well or make a motion on it. Sound good?
So what you're saying is we shouldn't be submitting those opinions?
Well, I guess what we're trying to do is get an extension past our next board meeting so the board can review the opinions, right? If we can't, then I guess we need to revisit that by email or whatever.
I'm not sure we have an opinion now, so.
Yeah. Well, because we don't have that. We don't know what our status is. Okay, we're through the agenda as printed, and we have two items that are left to go through, and I'm cognizant of time. How much time do we think we're going to need to take to discuss Gary's input?
Frankly, I don't think we have time to do the conversion thing, because I'm sorry, I took the time to read through the thing and I made tons of comments. And unless as I go, I'm going to knock off those comments, then, I don't know, I need a fair amount of time to ask a few questions. But I guess I'm saying, can we talk about putting it off to another meeting?
We can, but we can also say, John, like there's the option of submitting your comments.
That is what I would prefer. Otherwise, this just gets delayed and delayed and delayed. You express some questions, I would like to see them in writing so that then we can respond to them. Or send them to the conversion, to the working committee.
The working committee is the best place to drop them, right? 'Cause
But your written questions would be very helpful.
Okay.
what you think's missing all those sorts of things, right? Like I value your input on this. It's just that the process is rolling, right? And the process is submitted to the working committee to be included in the report.
Well, I was wondering what was I going to do with my days off, so yeah.
Yeah, please, okay. Could we go through Gary's?
Well, that's what we're just talking about, right? Is how much time is that going to take?
Talking about the conversion report. That was what I thought we were talking about.
So his comments are germane to my comments in the conversion report, so they're certainly very connected.
They are, but I'm asking, can we go through Gary's list of points, please?
I thought we put that on the.
Yeah.
And so what
I don't know how long we want to do that.
Right, because it's 20 to 5.
Can we deal with yours first? You got the first add-on.
I don't want to put myself first on this. I want to address whether I think this is an add-on. If we take it on, it's an add-on.
Sorry, I meant your add-on.
I do understand that, but because this one came up first, I don't want to jump you.
Okay, fair enough.
And, guesses this takes us an hour. Do we have an hour to go through this?
Suzanne, can I ask you a question? Is the number one point your number one concern?
Yes, because I think we can go through it quite quickly and actually answer some of these questions, which he raises in a very...
So here's my thoughts on this, right? Is Gary, we will submit this to the working committee, just like we said to John, submit this to the working committee, it's good input. The question that seems to be more at hand is number one, which is this standing committee, or this idea of a select committee, right? Which seems to really be more of a board decision than input to the report.
Yes, that's my understanding.
So if we just talk about number one, are you satisfied?
I would be, yes.
Okay. And that the rest of this is for input, and I would like the board's approval, and maybe I'll make a motion as to the board approves submitting Gary Mason's comments to the working committee as input to the governance study. All in favor? Discussion. I guess before we vote, I saw Eve's face and I didn't ask for discussion.
So, sorry, so you just want, the motion wants to bring these questions to the working committee?
To just forward this to the working committee. And then, so that's a motion, and then the second thing we would do is speak to number one ourselves.
Okay, so if you forward, just forwarding them to the committee doesn't assure us a timeline on when we get the answers into the report, or when we can actually, how are the answers going to come? The answers to these questions. And how are they going to come and when? And then from those answers, we have to decide what to do. If it's not going to come until ever, you know what I mean? Like, how are we going to be educated on these answers?
One step at a time. Get it to them, ask them for a response, and then we'll deal with it.
Yeah, we need a response, that's what I'm saying. So we just send them there and then they fall into what? Yeah.
Well, they get incorporated into the report, but let's modify the motion and to ask the working committee to respond to these questions as to how they will be done.
The report should already deal with these questions, so I would like to know, not just send them to them, but have them answered in the report, which is our public document, which educates people on how to make a vote, right?
And I guess maybe I'm assuming that that's what the working committee does, is they take this input and they adjust their report to reflect it. So that may be just an assumption.
Final draft.
What's that?
It's not final, it doesn't say.
It's still a draft.
And then it becomes a final report.
There will be a final report.
They know that for example, the contract with our employees, they know that all that information has yet to come in.
Which is
It
addressed.
will be incorporated.
I'm just looking at the timelines on the newsletter. It says the public engagement is coming and then the final report.
Correct.
That's right.
So there is still room for input into the final report. And I believe new trustees are a valid source of input. And I believe our new administrator advisor is also a valid form of input. And so I suggest we continue to forward all of that input to the governance working committee.
I guess I think it's out of order. Why would I know the final report. I just think that the public should have access to a report that includes answers to these questions. That's all I'm saying.
And they will.
They will.
They will. After it's a
Before the referendum.
document that's in process.
Before
So
the
you're on the
referendum.
advisory committee, how often have you issued a draft?
Twice.
Report?
Twice.
Twice.
Actually, 3 times. There was multiple.
And so another one could come before the public engagement and all
Yeah,
that.
they're going to be speaking to, I mean, we may know within days about the labor contract. So yeah, it's a
There will-
working document.
But there will, I do not believe there will be one before the open house. This is the final draft soliciting input.
Okay, so these questions, how big are the answers going to get to the public?
They could end up on a frequently asked questions page. That would be it.
And when you look at Gary's questions, a number of them have been already dealt with already.
Well, that's why I wanted to just go through them. I mean, I am very frustrated at this point. I really truly am.
Okay, so I asked the question, and you said, let's just deal with number one. And-
Well, because as Janice pointed out, if we just had gone systematically through them, we would have been able to answer them more. But now it's 4:45 and I'm hungry and I'm done. I'm done. I really am. This is extremely frustrating.
What do we want to do? Come on,
Why is it frustrating? I mean, I'm new on this board.
let's go through the questions.
I have no, the fact that we're not going through it, we're not actually going through this.
Come on, let's get in order here, right? Like, we're just arguing and yelling at each other. Come on, let's get in order.
We're not yelling at each other, we're talking, but can I just clarify that we're talking about the 2 pages that have numbers 1 through 4, as well as all the bullets on the next page? Is that what we're talking about?
Yes.
Yes, that's fine. So if I may, item number 1, I have no problems giving it to them, but is this not our direction? Like, isn't this their...
So are we going to discuss all these points or not? That's the question.
Let's start.
Okay,
And when we have
okay.
to finish, we'll finish. Let's just
So-
start. Number 1.
Is this not our action? Like, he's suggesting that we committee?
It sounds like it.
And then secondly, I understand the reform, I'm just not sure how it's going to happen.
I have a question whether it should happen at all. That's why we have a governance study working committee.
I can live with that.
Okay, Susan,
I think it complicates it.
You're saying that the idea of the select advisory committee would complicate it?
Well, you see, when I first saw this, I thought it meant like, once the vote was taken, we'd have this committee to go in between that time and when it's actually taken over. That's what I thought, and then I read it again, I thought, oh no, this is prior to the actual vote.
Right.
And so to me, that's our committee, and they don't have to give us permission to do that, and then I agree with you, do we really need it? And my answer to that is no, we don't need it.
I think the working committee does this, and for us to do that would be usurping what we already agreed to, which is to let unions, urban systems run this, and we would participate as members in that committee.
One question. Are there members of the public on this committee?
There are not.
And that's the major difference. That's the only difference I see between this.
Yeah,
committee.
exactly, yeah.
And John,
And I-
this is asked of us, not of the standing of the working committee.
We have an open house in 14 days, and another one in 19 days.
Could I speak to why this, I think, it even exists as a suggestion? It is to address the very real possibility that referendum, as much as we're all planning to go ahead with it, could get shut down. Our provincial election could get shut down or altered greatly due to the pandemic. I think Gary was saying, one other way of establishing transparency, like showing that we have done due diligence by involving the community in this really important process would be to establish a select advisory committee. I agree though, the working committee as it is, minus an actual landowner, is doing, it would be a duplication. So I agree that we have a working committee that is doing all of this, and to simply have a landowner on is duplicating another committee when we don't really have the time to do that. So I think though that was why Gary suggested it, was to really broaden our opportunities for bringing in the public and really showing that we have wanted their input and their involvement, which is a fair.
It's a good sentiment, but I think one that's been broadly covered by the open houses.
Yeah, I agree. So I'm prepared to not make a motion to have a separate, now yet another separate.
Any other comments on number one?
So then when you forward these, take that one out.
Can we do that?
Yeah,
It
or you
doesn't-
could just add in
yeah.
blue that, we discussed it and we thought that the working committee was,
I'll strike it out and just say moved by you before.
Okay, so Janice, number 2, I think you would.
It's all dealt with.
It's all dealt with and it's
Yeah.
clear.
Yeah,
So again, those are really good points of clarity. I don't think do we need to read this out loud for the purpose of the public?
Or will it be attached to the minutes?
I think it'd be great. Yeah, let's attach them.
Yeah.
That would be great, because they're really good points.
So 2 is off, it's taken care of?
yeah.
Yeah,
Good. Yeah, that's being, Urban Systems has it along with CBRD. CBRD has another public engagement that they've built a strategy for that deals with social distancing, public health, all that kind of stuff, and they're trying to duplicate that for us.
and I think we just passed number 3, which was we approved the question, the referendum question. Do we have clarity about 50% or?
So there is no strong, or there's no definitive statement from the ministry on this, right? The ministry will need a strong display of public support, which is preferably in the form of a referendum, followed by a vote of the board with, in terms of how the board wishes to proceed. So, you know, it is possible that the public says, we want to do A, and the board says, no, we want B. And the ministry will then take that into account as they take it forward to, as to whether they recommend dissolution or not, right? Now, as a board, like if the public said 60% in one direction and we said the other direction, that's irresponsible. If it was, you know, like 50-50, then maybe we do have to take a stance, right? But I think we have to wait for the referendum for us to know what our landowners do, because the most important thing here is to know what the landowners want.
That's right.
So we're okay on this one too?
Yeah.
If you want me to go through my emails that I've received from Catherine and the working committees I've received from Catherine and forward some information to you, I can do that.
Well, I'm happy with it.
Yeah, it's essentially, you know, we were talking about this at one point because we were so uncertain about referendum and public health that we needed to understand it. And, you know, it was quite clear that a referendum is preferred and that there are ways of doing it with public health right now. So we've gone down that path, but, you know, if a referendum can't happen, the ministry would expect things like mail-ins or polls or some other way of allowing the public to express their opinion before the board vote.
Just have a question on number 2 before we move on.
Yeah.
So what is expected of you? Get to be there and to answer questions of the public? Or is the urban systems answering the questions, or is the board supposed to be there at these public engagements to answer questions?
I believe we are supposed to be there, but I have the same question, right, which is,
She said it was
Not for the virtual,
Pardon me?
not for the virtual.
We don't have to be there for the virtual?
Well, how would you participate in that?
Well, it's just still, right?
Urban Systems is doing the presentation, sharing your screen, sharing your information. So I have not heard of theirs.
So there's, oh, they do it down in Victoria. Oh, I see, okay.
Yeah.
yeah, people sign in.
Well, what it is,
The CBRD will be present. We need to know that we will be present. So I think we need to get clarification of the Union Bay Board, the UBID Board of Trustees' role at both virtual and in-person events.
Yeah. I thought it was all clear.
Because we have agreed as a working committee to allow Urban Systems to be the spokesperson for the project. So, you know, it's difficult to have a whole bunch of people in there being able to answer questions as individual board members, right? As a board, it's my item as well, right? And so that's harder to do when there's 5 of that.
In person.
So I don't know what our roles are, why we're there. Because I think the open house is not about us expressing our opinions. The open house is about them getting, the landowners getting information.
Well, as a board, are we going to be there?
Well, that's what I want to do.
Yeah.
It doesn't make that great sense to me for us to be available to answer questions.
It doesn't?
Well, about the study, no. About, okay, so what will the board do next? Yes, those are valid questions.
Excuse me, stop talking for a minute.
Rules, that's all.
Tell me about virtual versus in-person meetings.
So there will be, on the 15th is virtual, so Zoom or something like that. And we are encouraging as many landowners as are comfortable to go that route so as to reserve limited seating at 3.
For October 20th.
October 20th, there will be 3 back-to-back in-person open houses that you must reserve a seat at so that we can manage populations.
And those virtual ones, are we allowed? I'm a landlord, I guess I can if I want to, right?
You sure you can. But then this is about, okay, so what's our role? If we're a landowner, if we're a board member there, right? How will the board speak? You know, and you know, it's important that, and I don't want us to speak at an open house about, well, my opinion is this, right? I want us to speak about things like, okay, so when the referendum is done, what will the board do? That's a question we should answer, right? The board will consider the public's input and then they will vote on how they wish to proceed with the results of the referendum and the conversion. So that's what I want us to be able to figure out, is how are we going to speak as a single voice, right?
Can we wait till we get to that motion, please?
Your opinion. Okay, so we were on number 3, right? No, we were on number 2. Did you get your question answered, Dee?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, she's gonna find out.
Yeah. Number 3, we've done. Number 4 is all about essentially additional financial details, which is what John really wants to speak to as well. There are 7 points.
Sorry if I may, Mr. Chair. You talked about the virtual meetings, but you didn't say the in-person meetings. When's the in-person meeting? There are argument yet.
I did say that. There are 3 back-to-back on the 20th.
Oh, I thought those were all virtual.
No, those are in person, they'll be in this room, and because of 6-foot spacing, there's very limited numbers of people that can be in here.
You said they're virtual.
Yeah,
30-minute time slots.
and then, so you'll have to reserve a seat at those, and just like we did for the AGM.
Okay.
So this, on the financial idea here, like I think if we dive into the details here, we'll be here all night, right? I think what this input is saying is, I'd like some more granularity in the numbers. Some of the things that Gary's put in here, I believe are in the report, like staffing levels. I believe that has been addressed in the report. But I think, in my mind, this is good input again for the working committee to see, and for urban systems to say, how can we give you more of this information? That's my opinion. Other people?
Could we just run down them and highlight which ones have been answered? Like, I think item changes, like, which ones are still outstanding? The liability insurance is not one that I recollect has been answered.
Let's start at the top. CBRD staff levels, my recollection is that has been answered in the report.
Yeah.
Sorry, you'll get it in my questions. It has not been answered in mine.
What's that?
It has not been answered in mine. You'll get it in my questions. You asked me the right questions. That's going to be one of them.
Okay.
Changes to representation with CBRD establish a special committee. That is addressed as optional, like as potential within the report that says that it's best practices that there would be for a period after conversion that there would be a committee established.
You get a sense that people would like to see that?
I don't have a sense of it. I don't think it's really been out there that much as to what happens then. Anybody else got any vibes on that?
No, I think.
The question being, like, if conversion happened, that means the board, after conversion, is dissolved, right? There is no UBID, so there is no board. But in other conversions, there has been a committee formed that acts in that same sort of function to be a go-between between landowners and CDRD to make the transition smooth.
Taken in a simpler form, I've seen that, we did it in Bend Harbor and other places, and it really does provide people with some assurance that it's being, we still have a say in the operations. Having said that, the interest in it died off over several years, and in my mind, as long as there's an opportunity for residents to see their budget, maybe they come out here once a year and talk to us about the level of service and what's it doing. I don't think they do that for everybody else. I could be wrong. But that's the second option, it's a little less forward.
Okay? So I think that has been addressed, that one.
Yeah.
The next one about the report referencing more aggressive water utility repair, operating, replacement standards and the timing for these upgrades. I actually recognize those words and kind of went, yeah, there needs to be more there, right? Because it just, it's open for interpretation as to what that means. Like I interpret it as, oh, you're going to repair and replace pipes at a higher frequency than you might as an improvement district. And it's increasing the costs if you convert, right? So I think I'd like some clarity on that, right?
If I may on that one, I absolutely agree with you, but I think when what even comes before this is will they do the studies necessary to determine what pipes have to be replaced first before they just willingly get at this. I think that's what they're planning on doing. An app report, for instance, asset management, that too is a big cost.
Well, there's been talk about doing, they didn't get the additional funding yet, I guess, remember they applied for the technical funding?
We need to have this work done. It's long overdue. We do not have a clear inventory of our water main situation, including 10 miles are missing. So it has not been done. It's long overdue.
It's quite apparent to our public works department where to start, which is Kilmarnock. It's a disaster. The Kilmarnock, the Craig Garrett subdivision has the worst point. It's leaking continuously, pretty much.
Well, the report showed that 65% of our water mains are needing replacement within 10 years. So we have a lot of work to do, and I don't believe the landowners that has been made very clear to them, and it needs to be made clear. I think what the CBRD is trying to say is, and Danny would agree, he said that at the last meeting, we've been managing it okay, piecemeal, as things break. But that is not, and that's what the CBRD is saying, that's really not good asset management planning to do frequent breakages piecemeal. And that needs to be done. And that's going to cost us money, whether we join the CBRD or not.
Yes and no. I understand what you're saying, but none of it is we lose control over it.
Well, that's true. The nut of it is, we're deciding whether we need to have a control over it. That's what the referendum's about, okay? And so it will have to be repaired. The point above is to say, tell us more about these aggressive water utility repair strategies, right? Like that's really, we need more detail that's related to that, right? The point after that, related to the above, there's uncertainty about, is there 30 or 40 kilometers of piping? I agree, we should know, but it's not relevant to the study in the sense, or in terms of the decision, because it has to happen. We need to know whether we stay or we go.
Yeah. So we need to follow up on that funding, because if we can't get that study funded, we're going to have to pay for that ourselves. We need to know that.
So, yeah, the funding was applied for, so. I know it was applied for, I just can't remember the show that. CBRD asked for it. In fact, now that I think about it, I think they actually said it got it.
So is that where who would fund that study? I mean, so
well, it's a technical assessment, right? Like, so that would be technical, is saying how many
so we need
kilometers
to
of pipe.
confirm whether that's what's going to happen with that.
Are you talking about page 17 and 18, all those studies that will need to be done?
Yep.
They've got that in the report, is that what you're talking about? all of the many, many studies.
Having said that, there's funding available for that stuff.
Sorry?
There's funding available for that stuff.
If you're an RD.
Yes.
Yeah, not when you're in an improvement district.
Yeah.
That's another issue. I think that's what we need to make clear to people is that we're not going to save money by necessarily by meaning an improvement district. These repairs have to happen one rate or another.
Okay, I think we've covered that one, right? And sort of, I think it's good input back to them again to say, continue to flesh this out, but I don't think we're gonna get there anytime soon, because basically what you gotta do is you gotta go drive the road and measure it.
That's right.
I actually, after really going through these, I realized that these costs will be with us no matter where, no matter
what.
And if we have CBRD and municipal funding in the immediate, I don't know how that can't be good for us.
For that particular point, yeah.
Okay, well, may I say something about that?
No, I'd like to just move on.
Yeah, okay, I still want to say something about that. This improvement district has done a fairly good job at managing its assets with the level of funding it's got. Nothing's to say that the assets won't continue to be managed that well with that kind of financial. To simply say that because we're going to have to do it anyway, it's automatically going to increase costs. Maybe, yeah, but maybe not. Maybe we'll have a different way of handling it, like the same way we've handled it in the past. So I'm not so convinced about the argument, but I know it comes into play.
Okay, so the next point on here is related above again, has the CBRD indicated its agreement to inherit the UBID's rate structure? So I think it's a good question, and it should be asked, right? But again, the calculations of rates are fairly simple, right? It's what are your costs and how do you recover them based on anticipated water utilization, right? So it's a pricing formula. And I guess the questions that get added into that is that what administrative burden, and the report answers that in different places. That says the administrative burden should go down, should stay the same or go down.
I'm not sure what this one.
So sorry,
Do our water bills and things and process tax cover all the water costs now?
Right now, yeah. We did not know the cost of running a water treatment plant. Now we do.
And are we taking in enough to cover all of the loan expenses and all the?
We haven't even run for a year yet, sorry.
Yeah, and that's the problem, we've only had peak season.
Well, okay, are you going out of your budget then for it, is what I mean?
It wasn't on the budget.
It wasn't on the budget, okay.
But the projections for the year have been.
Again, a pretty difficult question to get any kind of answer from the CBRD, I think, at this point.
What's that? The rate structure?
How are they going to know if we don't even know whether our rates cover our costs?
Well, you're right, it was an estimate when we set the rates, right? I wasn't there when we set the rates. The thing again we have to remember is that costs and revenues, whether we are CBRD or whether we are Union Bay, stay in the same buckets. They don't get mixed up with other things. The only thing that changes is administrative overhead, and that sounds like it's been addressed in the report as the same or lower.
I don't think this question has much utility. The bottom line is they gotta recover what they gotta recover. They already know by all the comments we have in the report, the costs are gonna go up. They're gonna go up because it's the regional district, and they'll have to recover whatever rate. So you know what? That starts next year as soon as they take over the system.
That's right. Liability insurance, to me, it's a detail. It's, a small line item, I'm sure. But, it needs to be addressed. It's good input into the working committee.
If I may, it's just a set formula out of their sports services policy. So. It's ensconced in policy.
Any issues particularly financially related to the conversion of the construction loans? Well, we talked about that today.
Okay.
You done? Okay. Okay, last item that we added was this, and we talked about it a couple times, is as we head into the referendum and the open house, there are going to be a few things, right? Plenty of opportunities for us to speak as representatives of Union Bay, and plenty of opportunities for us to speak as landowners and individuals. We have an obligation as a board to speak with one voice with respect to the opinions and the roles of the board. Our code of conduct policy talks about this, but not super clearly. I brought it with us, and we need to read it, and the trustee's handbook does the same thing. I'm not of the mind here to try to silence anybody, right? But what I'm worried about is that we confuse the community with respect to what the board is doing and saying. So I wanted us to have a discussion about how do we engage in both our roles as trustees, but also be able to express ourselves or not, I guess if the board says not, as individuals, and differentiate ourselves from our opinions from the opinions of the board. So that's the purpose of this, is just to say, I think we should get it in front of this so that we don't have worries or conflict within this group about how we've spoken. So I'll open it up for discussion, just to say if there's any people want to come and take it. John?
I'm absolutely okay in saying that the answer is the board as a whole is really interested in getting the best information forward to the taxpayer, residents, and leave it at that. I do have a follow-up one. So the question is, what are you voting? And the answer to that is my business, I guess. But I think we stay out of it. We want you to get the best information possible to make a decision, and that's it.
Okay, let me be devil's advocate and say, so the follow-up question is what's your opinion as to whether we should stay or not? Should we convert or should we stay as
well, that's the same question.
It's a little bit different in that it's softer, right? And so you may say, I don't want to, so you're saying I don't need to express an opinion on that?
Well, mine was more of a question. The second question I asked was more of a question. How are we going to respond to it?
Right. How would, and what would your preference be? Would you like to respond as an individual, or would you like to say we shouldn't respond as individuals?
I really want to support the board. I agree with your comments about we should have a common theme here. We should all be speaking the same tune, and whether or not we support it, does it really matter? I mean, it matters what we vote, yes, but that's our vote. So I'm okay not saying anything to anybody and saying, no, you know what? You have to make up your own decision.
Pete?
I would like the board to, I like John's sentiment there, that we are interested in finding out the best possible scenario for Union Bay. And I also think that it would be unethical for any board member to get involved in any campaign either way that goes on amongst the landowners. Stay out of it. That's what I think we should commit to do. And I also think that if somebody asks me what I want to do personally, I will tell them what I think about what's right for me. So that's, I think I've covered all the bases there, but I will agree with whatever the majority wants to do.
Suzanne?
Did you say if you were asked you will or won't?
I will. I will say what I want to do, what I as a landowner for 14 years want to do.
Yeah.
But it's up to them to do what they want to do. Just because I told them what I want to do doesn't mean they have to do that.
Yep.
Can I ask a follow-up question?
Wait.
Would you share your logic as to why you want to do that as well?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Yes.
Sorry, is it my turn now?
Sorry,
So I also feel that we're look at factual information and speak. You're here to speak and make decisions based on facts, and I will not be getting involved with any campaigns. However, I too am perfectly comfortable, if asked specifically for my personal opinion, I will give my personal opinion on this issue. Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
Well, again, it's a referendum. It's strictly up to the landowners to make the decision. We're trying to give them as much information as we can to the pros and cons of each, but it is really entirely up to them when they go to vote the way they wish. I don't want to be an influence on anyone voting. That's strictly between them and the voting box. My opinions really are moot because it doesn't matter which way I want to go. It's really immaterial. If they ask me a question to be clarified that they don't understand, I'll answer it to the best of my ability. But as far as which way I'm going to vote, that's between me and the voting box. And it goes for them as well. It's between them and the voting box. And whatever happens on this referendum, I have no problem with it. It's the landowner's decision. That's it.
My opinion is pretty much in line. The only thing I would add is I think it's incumbent upon us to actually state what voice we're speaking with, right? And just, you know, that the board opinion is the board believes X. Now, if you're asking me personally, this is me personally speaking. I think we have to be clear in what voice we're speaking with when we do this. So that would be my thoughts on this.
If I may just add to it, I guess when you start getting into our personal opinions, okay, here's another one. Do you think the study is sufficient enough for everybody to make a decision? Then you get into the nuts and bolts. And I don't want to go there. If the board feels that the study was sufficient to make an informed decision, then that's the comment back of the public.
So I guess there was one more thing to add, is I would actually almost like us to have a position that we take forward, right? As this is how the board is moving from here through to referendum. And that, you know, I think we've said it here, right? But that we all agree that our job as board members is to make sure that the landowners have as great an access to the information required to make an informed decision as possible, and that they have as many options available to them to gather that information and vote safely. Like, that is what our job is right now. And then what happens after that? Well, the board will then consider the input from the landowners and make a final consideration as to their decision on that. Or decision is not the right word. Their direction with respect to conversion. Because that is what is expected from us by the ministry. And I would say that last bit. We are required by the ministry to do that. So I think it's important that we have a position that we can speak to, and just how we go about forming that and agreeing to it. Or have we just done it?
Do you mean a position on what we think the public should do?
No, what the board voice is, right? Like, I don't believe we should have an opinion as a board until the referendum is over.
That's right.
Yeah, that's right, but we are allowed to have an opinion on our own and express it or not. Some of us have chosen not to, and some have left that open.
But also to differentiate that it is a personal opinion.
Yeah.
To be cognizant that that forms the basis of one group or another's attack on the board. That's what it's going to do.
What is? The board opinion or the personal opinion?
If the personal opinion says, no, I'm going to go this route and here are the reasons why, it starts pulling apart the whole process. And it creates division. But you know what? And I asked the question before, so I too am unsure what I'm going to say. But after this conversation, I'm pretty sure I'm going to say nothing now. I'm going to say it's your decision, our job is to get you the best information, and that's it.
That's right.
You know, it's sometimes hard to withdraw your opinion too, like when your signs on the side of the highway said what you were going to vote for. Right? And, you know, I'm in that position. And, you know, like, it's possible my opinion changed. You know, I'm certainly got a richer set of information at my fingertips now than I had before. I do agree that what is important here is to be measured in anything we say. And to speak clearly that the board is open, transparent, and committed to getting the information to landowners to make the best decision.
I understand your point. I think it's a good one, Alan's point, that having an opinion might be muddying everything, but I think my biggest concern about the whole thing is that most of the majority of the landowners won't educate themselves at all. They won't go to any of the information sessions, whether they be online or in person. And half the time, most people don't even know that there's an attachment with your water bill, which was the only hard information we're actually sending the landowners on this thing. Is that true? Is that it? That's the one-time piece of information we sent them?
I don't believe there's a mail, the report is not getting mailed.
The 4-page summary is not getting mailed out either? The 4-page summary that went to on the water bill, is that going to get sent again separately?
Well, it got mailed to people who get mailed bills, it got emailed to people who get emailed bills.
And that would be it?
And it's on the website, the entire conversion study is on the website, it's 108 pages.
Right. And so was the 4-page summary on the website?
Correct.
Any further? Do we need to form a formal statement for the board as to say this is where we're coming from? Or do we all feel it clearly?
I'd like to move to adjourn, please.
I have two hopefully very short questions. If we finish with that one.
Well, I didn't get an answer.
Well, I don't.
Feel the need for anything more?
If I said, would you send around an email and then maybe we'll...
Yep, I'll do that.
Okay. If I may, I just have two, I think, really quick ones. May I?
Are they on this topic?
This is moving on.
To another topic?
Yes. Well, first one, no. The second one, yes.
Okay, then the first one, yes, second one, no. We need to close up.
I can certainly just ask Janice on the two questions I have.
Okay,
That's basically what it is. You want my written comments on where I have an issue, right?
Yeah, and feel free to send them into the working committee too.
No, I'll send them around here first, I think, yeah. Okay, and that's fine, and I'll just talk to Janice and then fix it.
Move to adjourn? All in favor? Yay.